Hey guys, it's me again, bringing you another Paint With Me project. Today we're going to be working on this monogram right here. And this is what we'll be using. You need a little bit of white paint since our base is going to be white. I'm using chalk paint just because I had it out. You could use acrylic also. You just want it to be whatever color your base of your project is going to be. So if I was using black foam core, I'd want to use black instead. We're using Waverly Wax in Antique, Apple Barrel in Black, paintbrush, makeup sponge, sanding block if you need it. The other things that we're going to need is I've cut this piece of foam core down to 10 by 10. I also went ahead and cut a stencil. This can be a store-bought stencil. It can be one cut with a cutting machine. I cut this out of just cheap Dollar Tree contact paper and then added some transfer paper over it. I kind of cut it down to size, and this is the stencil I'll be using to do for a friend of mine since I finished mine already. So we're going to start with a little bit of our white paint. Let me get some on my plate here. And you're not going to need that much. I'm going to set that to the side long enough to go ahead and attach my stencil. So I'm going to lift this transfer tape off. Guys, my vision is not so great anyway, and being at a weird angle makes this harder for me. I'm just going to pull this whole piece off. And when I cut my board, I didn't get super clean edges. That is what the sanding block is for. And I'm not measuring this. I might should. But I'm just going to eyeball this right about center. And this foam core is really light, so you gotta kind of hold it still to pull this smooth across. Even like that, I like it. But we're gonna go a little further with this. And I'm gonna see. I did not use transfer paper when I did mine, and I really wished I had. I wasn't sure if the contact paper would stay. And if some of you have never seen this, this is a bone folder to help crease paper. And I'm holding my breath while I do this. The contact paper isn't as sticky as vinyl would be, but it's sticky enough to make a good stencil. So I'm going to have to work through this. And if any of you are old school scrapbookers, you're kind of already familiar with doing this from years of rub-ons. And it's a little more work than vinyl. I just didn't want to waste vinyl because we're going to peel this back off after we paint it. And I'm just smoothing this contact paper down as I pull this off, because the contact paper is really kind of prone to bubbles if you've ever put it on a shelf. And unlike vinyl, you've got to catch it at each edge, where vinyl sticks a little better on its own. I could have just pulled this off like stickers and laid them down, and that's what I did with mine. However, I did get it a little crooked. And wanted to try this way instead, just to make sure, since this was for someone else. I didn't want it crooked. Now, I did realize that because of what I'm going to show you after this, on how to get the best results out of a stencil, even if you accidentally tear this, because the contact paper is so much thinner than real vinyl, you're going to be able to correct any of those tears. Just try to keep it intact. Like, don't twist it. Try to keep it in its alignment, even if it tears. Oh, we're on the last leg of this, guys. Last leg. I'm sure there's probably vinyl people out there cringing. I've only just started messing with this. I'm sure some of you guys have a much faster way. Here we go. I'm going to go back in, and I can see where bubbles are. And right here, I'm not sure if you can tell, but I did rip it a little bit. And I'm just going to try to keep it right in its spot. I'm going to make sure I have no bubbles so that I don't get paint seeping under. Okay. So the edge of this I've cleaned up just using my sponge sander. And I just went along the sides and buffed off any places that I might have not cut very straight, or that the foam frayed out, so that I get a real clean edge. Now that everything's laid flat, your board is prepped, this is where the big secret is. I'm going to go back to my white paint here, and just taking a makeup sponge, because we're going to dab this. And I'm going to say that you can see the paint halo. Once this is done, you can slightly see it. It doesn't bother me because it gives more definition to the wood look. However, you could go across this entire thing as we're doing this part right here. I'm just not going to. I'm starting with white paint on white, over this stencil because this is going to glue off my stencil, essentially, this white paint. And if any paint seeps under this stencil, it's going to be white, so it will be a clean effect if there's bleed through underneath the stencil. And anytime you're doing a stencil like this, this method works. Just go with the color that your base is. And I'm going to do this more than once just because this contact paper is really thin. And it's not the stickiest once it starts getting wet. But you see how quick this is going. And like I said, you can see a slight halo when this is all done, just around here where this white paint is. And the other paints dry to the chalk paint differently than the foam core board. It didn't bother me, but if you want it to do the whole thing, just go ahead and do this all at once. The whole sheet, not just over the stencil part. I'm going to use my heat gun to speed this up for a second before I do my next coat. And I'm not going to do too directly because it will lift the contact paper. Okay. I can add another layer. And chalk paint is pretty thick, but I'm doing 2 thin layers to get a good seal rather than risk any seepage even with this. And if you have any excess where you first blotted it on, be sure to smooth that out. And you can see just how quickly this really goes. It took me longer to get the transfer off. And I'm going to make sure that this layer of white is dry. Is very dry, actually, before I add the next layers. Or instead of layering, they'll blend. And if you see any spots, I'm just going to use my finger. If you see any spots where it's lifting or bubbling from the moisture, be sure to lay it back down and just sponge back over it. You can see this already looks pretty cool, actually. Can you see that? You could stop there and call that a project. It has a very cool look to it. Okay, I've got that dry. I'm gonna slide these things out of the way here. Now I'm back to using my cheap bristly brush. We're not gonna need this anymore. You can already tell I've used this before. Just snip the ends off. You can use it again. So I'm going in with my black. And now my Waverly, and I'm just going to use what's in the lid until. So I'm going to just slide this little mat under here to paint on. This is just a little Dollar Tree mat. If you guys need a surface that you can move around and paint on. And if you rinse it off right after you're done, it's just going to rinse the paint right off of it. Okay, so I'm loading my brush dry. I'm just tapping it in. And I'm going to choose my wood grain to go this way. I could very easily go this way, but I'm going to stay consistent whichever way I choose. So we're going to start at the edge. We're just going over the entire thing. I'm sliding away here, guys. So I just spun it around so I could make those strokes up and down a little more easily, which is actually sideways. Okay, gonna need a little more. This is where we're getting our first layer of kind of full coverage. Now to where I'm at, I don't know, probably, guess you'd consider this like 2/3 of the way covered. I went heavier the first few brush strokes. So you see I've got some kind of darker streaks here. Now as I come in and fill in these other areas, I'm not going to go quite as heavy with this Waverly wax. I'm going to go slightly lighter and then blend it out. And that little bit of time in between those strokes allows that pigment to sit slightly darker in those areas. And if you notice, I'm almost doing it in kind of a plank form, where I'm just moving around where the darker spots are and where the lighter spots are. And if you notice, the more you blend out on this, it spreads that paint and leaves the strokes. And you can start to see what I mean by the halo where the paint was applied. And it's okay when we add the darker color, you don't really see it. That's why I said if you wanted it, if you were worried about how this looks, do the whole surface. Just try not to saturate it too much. Do it with the same blotting that you do over your letters. When I add the darker color, that halo kind of blends in and it becomes less of an issue. I'm going to continue to just blend this out. I know, guys, it's kind of like watching paint dry. But I think seeing the paint get worked in this way may help some of the visual learners get more realism to their faux wood. I'm just going to go in. I don't want a whole lot more coverage because I'm pretty happy with where my darker versus lighter spots are. But here where there's a few dings in the foam core board, I'm going to touch those. And mine was lifting right there. So. Mine came out wonderfully. I'm hoping that it comes out again this time. Although I did not do it all at once. But since I don't know how to edit videos yet, I kind of have to do it all at once. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to do here is clean up where my fingertips were. Now at the end, you can see I didn't do my edges yet. I went in with a smaller paintbrush at the end and just made this so much easier. It's just I did not want brush strokes to interfere with the stroke marks that we have mimicking green right now. And if I was to take my brush across here and try to blend that in, you would see little wisp going the wrong way, that way. So get all my fingerprints cleared off. And I'm not wetting my brush to clean it off in between colors. I'm just wiping it off. I'm going to speed this up some. You guys can see what I mean with the paint halo. If that bothers you, just go ahead and do this whole surface. Either way, it's not going to be a problem. I'm going to spin this around and try to get it a little closer to dry. I don't like doing this too much because it can make your foam core kind of bubble up or warp. Although it's a good way to help straighten it if it does get warped just being stored, or I don't know, mine don't come from Dollar Tree in that great a condition to begin with. So I've dipped into the black and I don't want a lot of heavy coverage to start with. So I'm going to go real light. And I've kind of spaced it out with that same stroke across the board. And here where you can see the halo area more, I'm going to add heavier in the black streaking, and it's going to help hide that. If you notice, I'm spinning it around just so that my brush strokes don't end up being uniform from one side, but I'm staying with the grain that we're creating. And I'm starting here, flicking from the edge over. And it kind of darkens that edge. I'm going to go down close to the edge at the bottom or the sides, whichever way you're looking at yours, and kind of do the same thing. And this just kind of finishes off the edges a little better. You're still going to have to go in and touch up there. But if you notice, it almost frames it out when you catch these sides that way. So I'm going in here where I see some lighter spots. This one I'm going a little darker with. The friend that this is going to, she has a lot of black decor and wall art. And while I don't want to go completely black with this for her, I do want it almost a pretty dark shade of wood. And I'm just looking to see where it needs a little more, a little less. And I'm making this pretty heavily aged. It's definitely going to have that, you cut up an old board that's been sitting out in the weather a long time and made your sign with it. It's certainly not going to look like a piece of cardboard from the dollar store. And if you notice, I love when it does these things. This is where there was marks inside of the foam core where it got kind of beat up. I don't know if you can see how cool that looks. It looks like abused wood. So I'm getting pretty happy with this. I want to go just right through here a little more. Okay. So we're done with this part. This one's a pretty vintage feel for the wood. Clean my fingers off. Now for the fun part. Let's see how this is going to go. I'm going to grab some little cheating tools here because I need the extra help. So this thing is still a little damp, and that's fine. I'm going to go in starting at the bottom, and I'm going to just pull this all the way up as clean as I can. And I went this way because the cut goes this way, and it almost makes it easier to peel without things tearing apart. So I should be able to get this in one huge piece. Oh, look at that. Do you see how crisp those lines are? That's why it's important to do that white layer of paint first. Because the only thing that was allowed to seep under there was white. So you're barely going to notice it if it seeps. Look how pretty that looks too. And I'm going to try to get started. So the only seepage we had was white. Oh, that was me, guys. I don't know if you saw what I just did. Since my paint is still kind of damp, because I didn't want it to pull it up in layers, you have to watch out for transference when you're touching it. And that was me touching wet paint back to that spot. That was not seepage, though. Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. So does this, though. I really love how that looks. And the paint's still damp here, you can see. And I have to be careful not to transfer it again. This is so satisfying. Excuse me. We have allergy season. I love those crisp lines. Okay. Make sure that my hands aren't covered. Now I hope you can see where all the indentions in the board took the black streaks. And so it looks naughty and it's honestly really kind of cool how it takes to that. You see the edges there? Okay, so the last thing that I would suggest, and I would wait until this has had plenty of time to dry, is if you felt the need to seal it, which I didn't because I'm certainly not using this outside. It's foam core. But if you wanted to seal it, something like this would be just fine. Although once it dries, the wax, the Waverly wax tends to have its own sheen to it, which I really like. So something like this, I'm certainly not going to cover with the Mod Podge. Now, if I was leaving the stencils on or adding vinyl, I would, but since I was just using it as a stencil, it worked out better this way. But I want you to look how crisp and perfect those lines are. It almost looks like it's got vinyl on it. And there you go. Simple as that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to be doing a few more. I feel like the more that I show this technique, the more comfortable people get with it. The more they can play with it, the more realism and options that you kind of bring for yourself. So the last thing I have to do with this is I'm going to give it time to dry, and then I'm going to go in and paint the edges. And there's mine with the finished edges. So once it dries completely, I'll go in and do that part. And it'll be ready. And my friend has a shelf that she has hung up with command hooks or gorilla hooks or something along those lines. And she can't do a whole lot with it as far as decorating. So this is a really good option for that. Or a really good option for renters or people in temporary situations where you still want something cute, but you don't want to damage your walls. You can hang this up with a command strip very easily. Just attach it to the back. You're good to go. Put it on a shelf. Anywhere you want to. These would work really great in tier trays. Although you might want to go a little smaller. This one is 10 by 10. So it's a pretty good size. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I loved how these turned out. I've got a few more in the works that I think you're going to enjoy. And they'll have links. This was just a design I did myself. The next couple may have links with them so that you can go in and get the SVG file. Or just use your own. All I did was use the contact paper. You can easily cut your own design into contact paper. Just using a pair of scissors or a craft knife. So hope you guys try it. And if you do, be sure to share it with everyone. Thanks. Bye.